Welcome to r/JustNoHOA, where people tell stories about their crazy homeowner associations. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. What is your nightmare HOA story? We live in a condo and began receiving $100 fines for not picking up dog poop. The area behind our building is a common area and lots of people walk their dogs around. I offered to submit DNA testing for my dogs and they ignored me and continued to send notices of fines. I began taking my phone with me on every walk and took photos and videos of me picking up poop with timestamp evidence. I sent a folder full of photos to the HOA with photographic evidence that I was picking up after my dogs. We continued to receive fines. I got a small trash can and kept on my patio and began saving my bags of dog poop for 2 weeks. I did tie the bags, but they were still obviously smelly as poop bags are very thin plastic. I then emailed a box of poop to the HOA office along with copies of time-stamped photos showing I had picked it up. I told them that I had better not ever receive another fine for dog poop because I had provided more than sufficient evidence that it was not us. Miraculously, the fines stopped and we have not received any for over 2 years. And in answer to this story, I went through this in an apartment complex before. I have a very large dog. Someone was letting their very small dog poop outside the dog park and then leaving it there. One of the maintenance guys did not like my dog just because of her size. One day we are out walking back from the park. She poops, he watches her and while she's pooping walks away. I pick it up. 2 days later I get a fine for $75 for not picking up after her. I made the lady from the office come and show me the offensive pile. The amount of poop there was so small I barely noticed it. It clearly was not from my dog. For 2 weeks I was on the phone almost daily disputing this fine. I'm not about to pay for some irresponsible dog owner's failure. I finally say, come over and I will show you why you are wrong. The complex manager came over the next day. I walked my dog outside, let her poop and said, now tell me, how is that the same as what you have pointed out? The fine went away the next day. I gotta say that is a very hefty fine for not picking up after your dogs. One thing I find interesting nowadays, in certain cities in Europe it is especially expensive to drop cigarette butts on the sidewalk, for example. I've heard there are some cities where you have to pay upwards of 1,000 euros if someone catches you doing that. What is your opinion about these fines for everything? In my opinion, it's important to keep a place clean, of course. But some of these fines are kind of outrageous. And the next story, we have only been part of an HOA for the last few months and it is already living up to every stereotype I have ever had in my head. They held our once annual meeting with very little notice and like 6 people showed up. They elected a new association and immediately decided to spend $700 on dog crap receptacles, even though like 4 people have dogs and the whole neighborhood is one street. This sparked an incredible amount of drama. One guy on the HOA decided he was going to get super defensive when people started questioning this decision and it quickly devolved into him just taunting people on Facebook because he was on the board and they were not. And if they did not like his authority, they should change the bylaws. Then someone left a bunch of dog crap in his driveway. Then he resigned from the HOA, no word on the dog crap receptacles. This has all happened in the past 3 days. So apparently if you are dealing with a dictatorship HOA, just leave some dog poop on the HOA president's driveway and the problem will solve itself. And the next story, other way around. I helped a customer stand up to their HOA and win. I worked as a team supervisor for DirecTV at this time. Most of my duties were administrative, but if anyone on my team had an escalated call supervisor requested, then those were my job too. One of my agents got a call and from what he told me, the customer immediately requested a supervisor that he needed someone with more authority than a frontline service rep, even though my agent could have handled this. So I take the call and the guy is frantic and asking me for help. He had been going rounds with his HOA over the placement of his satellite dish. As it turned out, due to various obstructions, the only way his dish could be installed and maintain a quality signal was pole mounted. So it is on a pole in his side yard instead of on the roof/side of the house. The HOA had deemed that a violation and fined him. They then threatened further proceedings against him when he refused to pay. Something about violation of the HOA covenant agreement or some such nonsense like that. They had shown up this day to further the issue, and he decided to call us and see if there was anything we could do. Oh yes, there was. I asked if I could speak to the HOA rep that was in his home, and he was more than pleased to let me handle it. After introducing myself and whatnot, I informed the HOA rep that it is a violation of federal law to deny the homeowner the placement of their dish if that is the only place it could be installed to get a high quality signal. The HOA rep instantly starts trying to tell me what's what when I just rattled off over the air reception device rule of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. What? The OTAT rule. It's a part of the act I just named that explicitly forbids the restriction of placement of a signal reception device if that is the only feasible installation option. In short, you cannot make him remove it, and if you force it, he has options. I could not literally say he can take you to court since I'm not one of the corporate lawyers, but the point was made clear enough. He just handed the phone back to my customer and left the house. The customer was so freaking excited. You have no idea how much of a hassle this has been, fighting with them over this for months. The threats of fines, etc. Thank you so much. A victory for the little guy. Screw HOAs and their power-tripping little sycophants. By the way, one thing I'm always curious about, do you guys still watch television frequently? I gotta say, I probably have not owned a TV for around 10 years by now, and I'm honestly fine with it. I just watch YouTube, Netflix and Amazon Prime on my iPad or my phone, or even my PC. But how is it for you guys? Let me know in the comments. I lived in a high-rise in Chicago that had an HOA full of old people with too much money. Fortunately, I was only renting, but I was curious to learn about the HOA and they were gracious enough to let me sit in. The condo had just built a brand new outdoor patio for grilling, etc. The powers that be did not like the shade of red of the cobblestone brick that they laid for the area, so they allocated $1 million to redo the entire area with new brick. There were a few attendees who were young professionals who protested, but they were heavily outvoted by the contingent of wealthy old people who felt this was a justifiable use of funds. Outrageous. And the next story, I would sit in my yard with my dog between 4 and 6 PM every Friday for 3 months. Why? Because the HOA would measure my grass every effing Friday. My lawn guy was the best and I refused to switch. However, he could only come on Saturday. HOA let us choose which day we inspected. Everyone voted for Saturdays, but they secretly vetoed it and came Fridays but claimed it was Saturday they were coming. To prove this, I sat with my dog every Friday waiting for him. He would park, wait a while, then go to another street and measure there. My street was the only one who did not receive fines for breaking the agreement. It became a party when everyone figured out what I was doing. People would cook out in the front and we would all go throw on coals and food as needed. I got reported for something or other after the 3-month marker, so I brought my supercut 3 months of timestamped videos and submitted them to the HOA distribution list before I went to meet with them. There were 40 to 50 people there because we had organized a day to go and air grievances. It was maybe the best time I ever spent with any HOA. Honestly, if someone would come every damn Friday to measure how long my grass is, I would probably go crazy. I don't understand how people can deal with this. And the next one, rented a house in an HOA. It was not too bad, just normal stuff, but every now and then some board members would tool around and hand out fines for dirty driveways and such. Wouldn't have cared if the president and a board member did not live on the same street as me and their driveways were in massive disrepair. The board member's son did some work on his truck and there was a massive oil spill partly covered with a red towel that sat there for 8 months. Meanwhile, a few rust-colored streaks on our concrete was worthy of a fine. The funniest was when the HOA decided to install very aggressive speed bumps. The ones that were there previously were fine, graded to not be too jarring but required you slow down. The only accident that occurred while we were there was the spouse of a HOA board member driving drunk and plowing into a tree. But there were always notices and mailings for people to slow down, as "this is not a racetrack." I guess they felt adding in a couple of literal asphalt curbs in the middle of the street would show people who dared to drive over 10 miles per hour on the main road. The only way over these things without feeling like you were going to break something on your car was to ease up the first side, come to a complete stop, then slowly ease down the drop. Once for the front wheels, another for the rear. Some people had just taken to driving on the grass around them, so they put up concrete barriers there. After a few weeks, someone decided to pour diesel fuel on the speed bumps the day before the garbage trucks did their rounds. The speed bumps got completely destroyed. The HOA reinstalled the bumps and somehow made them even more aggressive, and a week later, Captain Diesel struck again. They yanked them out again and just paved over the holes. It was beautiful. They did end up installing speed bumps a few months later, but they went with the stock plastic ones that bolt to the street, which was much more preferable to the man-made cliffs of Dover that were there previously. And the next one, other way around, my mom was the president of the HOA for her backwoods little neighborhood. Everyone used one well. The well had a problem, so no one had water. It was $800 for a temporary fix or $2,000 for a permanent fix. My mom had a meeting where out of the 30 people, 5 showed up. No big deal, those 5 people funded the $800 to get it fixed, since they have been without water for almost a week. No one would split the cost, and dues were so low it did not cover them, so those 5 people paid for everyone's well. Well, in preparation for the actual fix, she tried to raise money but only got half a way there when it broke. My mom went door to door asking for everyone's share before they would fix it. It was like $50. It was another week without water. No one would pay for the well they all used. Finally, around half of the neighborhood raised the money to fix it. Later, they all had a huge barbecue at my parents' house, but the people who did not pay were not invited. It's actually interesting to hear the other side of the story, because obviously there can also be positive precedents for HOAs. Mother-in-law was fighting stage 4 ovarian cancer a few years ago. Had no desire to take down our Christmas lights, we were constantly visiting the hospital, was very touch and go. Had a child under 1, was a very emotional time. HOA compliance officer constantly would stop at our house at all hours of the day. We had security cameras, so finally, after reviewing the footage, we called the guard check to see what the emergency was. We were told that Christmas has been over for 3 weeks and we need to have our lights down before the end of the month, or he would fine us $25 a day for the first week, then $50 each day after that. We explained the situation and the guy said, "Well, it's not my problem, take your lights down." My wife exploded on the douchebag, went to the next board meeting and let loose on the board and general manager. Turns out it was not a HOA policy. The guy worked for the security company that was hired to work the main entrance guard check and would get a bonus if he would patrol and hand out fines for HOA violations. This a-hole would just drive around, make up his own rules and fines, and by the next meeting was fired and a new security company was hired when the contract was up in the summer. Everything worked out in the end, douche fired, mother-in-law cancer-free for over a year. I gotta admit though, it seems to be a lucrative side job to collect made up fines for HOAs. Just kidding of course, but guys, please let me know in the comments whether you have ever received any fake fines. To be honest, personally, I've never gotten a fake fine so far, but then again, we are also blessed to not have any HOAs. We have the HOA president from the Third Reich. This man is on such a power trip, you would think he was running a massive gulag with the lives of 1 million peasants at his disposal. He protects even the most trivial information as if it were top secret intelligence and dispenses his own brand of justice with no regard for the actual rules. And he is a liar. At The last general HOA meeting we sat for 40 solid minutes while he regaled us with his vague bullcrap stories about his years as a Special Forces officer in the United States Army. According to him, he has been shot twice, held for ransom in an undisclosed foreign hellhole, and awarded top secret military honors that he is not allowed to talk about. Here's the thing though. He is maybe 5'5", weighs at least 350 pounds, did not know how to break down the gym weightlifting equipment, and made a complete ass of himself by saluting a neighbor who came to the meeting late, still wearing his BDUs. The neighbor, who works at the nearby military base, laughed out loud and said, "Dude, I'm an E4. Guess who got written up for leaving his garbage cans out? You know, that is one of the things I don't like about r/AskReddit. The stories sometimes don't really have an ending, and for this one especially I would love to hear more about this crazy president. Next one. Oh boy, do I have a good one. Obligatory not me, but my best friend. My best friend S grew up in suburban Arizona. His family owned their home and rarely had problems with their HOA other than it being generally fascist. It all started with some cardboard boxes. S and his sister, at the ripe age of around 6 or 7, wanted to make a fort in their front yard. Their dad, being the great guy, he helped them build a crappy cardboard box fort for them to play in. Being kids, they played in the fort for a couple hours and proceeded to get distracted elsewhere. Not a day later, they received posted notices on the door and phone calls informing them they need to clean the unsightly garbage out of their yard or be faced with fines. It was not a huge deal, but left the family a bit jaded towards the HOA. Fast forward a handful of years later, S's dad decides he wants to paint the house. Now, if you don't know how most HOAs have strict rules on the color and send templates for you to pick off of, he said the templates ranged from 10 to slightly different 10. S's dad finds a color he likes that's more of a greenish tan and sends it and paints the whole house. The HOA proceeds to have a meltdown because they painted their house outside of the allowed color spectrum. S's dad says, "No effing way, it's basically the same color, I'm not repainting my entire house." So the HOA hires a contractor to come down with a paint color tester and posts notices on their door with a detailed analysis of how his color is Yucca tan and does not fit the spectrum, and if they don't repaint by the end of the month, they will be fined. Instead of folding, S's mom finds out when the next meeting is and discovers no one votes. The same dude has been president of the HOA for way too long, and there is some shady shit going on in terms of contracting. So she walks around the neighborhood the next few weeks, campaigning, and runs. She wins by a landslide, largest turnout for an HOA meeting since its inception. Apparently, everyone was also sick and tired of the bullcrap, but just bent over. So S's mom is elected president and discovers that the previous regime was doing the whole hook up my son-in-law by contracting his company and pay him stupid amounts of money to water the sand-washed bullcrap. She quickly ends all that stuff rather than change any rules other than a few stupid ones. The S family office just decided to refuse to enforce any of them. S's mom goes years as a president. Recently she decided F it and did not show up to the election, and someone else got elected. Now the new guy is trying to enforce the old rules, but everyone is so used to the freedom that there is an effing war going on. And the next story was sent by a loyal viewer of mine called Bill, and it's not a traditional entitled parents just no mother-in-law story or whatever, but it is a bit of a lesson in human nature with a feel-good ending. This takes place somewhere around 40 years ago in a medium-sized city in upstate New York. It was December and the holidays were approaching. I was volunteering with an organization that collected non-perishable food items to be donated to people who might otherwise go hungry. Although donations were accepted year-round, at this time of year we stepped up our efforts. One of the ways we did this was to stand outside supermarkets with an empty cart. As people entered the store, we told them who we were, we also had a sign we hung on the cart, and asked if they would consider buying one non-perishable food item to donate and drop it in our cart on their way out. I was only able to do this for a few nights and only for 1 week. 2 nights in particular I will never forget. The first took place in a more affluent part of the city. The people here mostly lived in large homes and were generally people with larger incomes. We assumed that because of the neighborhood and the fact that the people there had more money than most, that we would be able to collect a fair amount of food. Silly us, we could not have been more wrong. A few people donated, but most just stuck their noses in the air and ignored us. The second night that sticks out in my mind, just a day or two later, was in a very different part of town. This was unquestionably the poorest section of town, considered by many to be a slum area. The population was mostly minorities, the houses were run down, and there was a fair amount of crime in the area. We were not too keen on standing outside the supermarket there. It's not that we were so much concerned for our safety, it is just that it was darn cold out, and in such a poor neighborhood we honestly did not expect to collect very much. Most of those people barely had enough food for themselves. It was not fair to expect them to be able to contribute much. As we expected, things were moving pretty slowly. But still, we smiled and were friendly to people as they went in and came out of the store, whether or not they donated anything. Most were friendly in return and at least extended holiday greetings to us. And then the unexpected happened. Out of the door came a very elderly African American couple lugging 2 carts filled to overflowing with groceries. They stopped by our cart and we smiled and greeted them, expecting they might donate an item or two. But no, these 2 dear, sweet people gave us both of their carts all the food. They wished us a Merry Christmas and left. The other volunteer and I stood there with our mouth hanging open and tears starting to form in our eyes. Here, in the poorest part of the town, people who probably barely had enough money to make ends meet spent a huge amount of money on groceries and donated all of it to feed people who were even poorer than they were. I have never forgotten that, how those more affluent, snooty people with their noses in the air and their wallets full of money begrudgingly gave a few items of food, while a poor old couple, probably in their late 80s at least, gave us 2 grocery carts full of food and never begrudged a single cent of the money they spent. Thank you very much, Bill, for sending that story via email, and I gotta say, it pretty much confirms my own experiences that I have made all around Southeast Asia, meaning that the poorer the people are and the less they have, the more willing they are to share what they have with others. For more examples of these situations, I would suggest you guys to watch the YouTube channel called Bald and Bankrupt, because that guy with his travels is pretty much showing exactly what I just mentioned. But anyway, let's continue to the last story, this time from r/ripe stories. This is also not really a traditional story, but at least something wholesome. It was posted by Cruel1969 and is titled, "Have you ever pulled a kind prank on someone?" I did this when I was 19 or 20, it would have been 1989 or 1990. My neighbor was a really nice retired guy who loved his car. He was really obsessed with his gas mileage. I wanted to see what would happen if I made his mileage go up by a lot, like from 25 to 30 miles per gallon to hundreds of miles per gallon. I doubt I could afford to do this today, but this was in the late 80s or early 90s. I got a 5-gallon gas can and started topping his car's tank up every night. He typically did not use more than 5 gallons a day, but if he had, I would refill the can and come back. It took a couple of days for him to notice, but at first he probably just figured he had not driven as far as he had thought. But pretty soon he realized he had a problem. I saw him working on the car about 3 weeks into my prank and I asked him what was up. "It's not using up fuel." "You mean it's not running?" "No, it runs fine, but the fuel gauge has been showing full for the last 3 weeks. "So your fuel gauge quit working?" "That's what I thought at first, but when I went to the gas station, the tank was already full." He took the car to several mechanics and none of them could figure out why the car did not seem to be using any fuel. They would finally give up and say, "Why complain?" In the end, I guess he suspected maybe someone was filling his car up at night, so he waited in a dark room that faced his driveway and he caught me topping off his tank. It was a lot of fun watching him try to figure out why his car quit using up gasoline. He did spend some money on mechanics, but that money was a lot less than the cost of the gasoline, so he was not upset about that. I really like pulling kind pranks, especially if people don't know who's doing it. I tried to get a YouTube challenge going, doing something nice for a random stranger, but people would rather set their bare skin on fire or eat laundry detergent pots. It makes me sad that people would rather do something that is uncomfortable, painful, or outright dangerous than help someone just to surprise than with a random act of kindness. Interesting that you say that at the end, because that was exactly what I was thinking as well. That reminds me of that one idiot on YouTube, I think it was some Spanish YouTuber or something, who tried to prank homeless people and then fortunately got his channel shut down for that. Random acts of kindness, that is the kind of prank I would love to see, honestly. But anyway, unfortunately, this has to be the last story for today. I hope you enjoyed the content, and if you did, please don't forget to leave me some ripe stars in the comments and like the video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I see you again tomorrow.